Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. Good to see everyone again. Before I begin today's live stream, as always, if somebody can do me a quick favor, just let me know that you can hear me okay. I need to make sure my audio is working correctly, and we can go ahead and begin today's live stream. Again, welcome everyone to today's live stream. Do me a quick favor, just let me know that you can hear me, and we will go ahead and begin. Hey Josh, thanks for the confirmation. Morgan, hey guys, welcome back. We have an exciting topic today. We're going to be talking about triggered actions. And we're going to take a look at some popular examples of triggered actions today. For today's live stream, I've picked simple to medium level triggers in terms of difficulty. I realized that we might have some novice level Caspians on today's call, and I didn't want to overwhelm anyone, especially if they're new to the platform and they've never built a trigger before. So I think it makes more sense to treat this class as a entry level to triggers, and I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to cover this topic in the future live streams as well. And if you guys would like to see an example of something that you were hoping to develop on your end and implement, just let me know in the chat window. We're going to save the chat, and we can bring the triggers back in the future, because sometimes an entire class can be dedicated to just a single trigger, especially if you stack multiple triggers on top of each other. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions before I begin today's live stream. Hope you guys are having a good Monday, and I hope that you had a good weekend. And also, I hope that your business doesn't run on Instagram, because apparently Instagram is down. Can't refresh my feed. So, changelog. Okay, yeah, we're going to be looking at that trigger today, Josh. So that's one of the ones that I have planned today. So let's take a look at the three triggers that I picked for today's live stream. Okay, the first one is the history log. Okay, when you make an update to a contact, what we're doing is basically submitting that change or update to a separate table. Okay, and I think this trigger, actually any application can benefit from this trigger, because we always want to keep track of all the historical changes on the account. So that's one of them. The second one I picked for today's class, which is a checking against class capacity. So if you have a list of classes and you set a class capacity for that specific class, and students are enrolling or registering for the class, we are doing a class count. And there are two triggers that are running here, actually. So if you enroll into a class, let's take a look here. So if I click on this link here for statistics, and if I submit any random name, let's just say Jensen Wong, and I hit submit, you're going to see the class count increment of 1. And the second trigger that's running here, once the class capacity hits 5, so let's say 5 against 5, we're going to change the status of that class to full. And this class will no longer be visible inside this report, because this report is filtering all the data based on the open classes. And then the final trigger that we're going to look at today, also there's another trigger that's running here actually, which is when you remove a student from a class, then you're going to see this 1 change to a 0, because we should also be able to subtract from the class count. So let's just take a look at this as an example here. This one, calculus. So if I add one more student to this class, let's say, I don't know, Anthony Wu, and I hit submit, you see how we no longer see that class because we changed the status to full. But if I go to manage students, and let's say we reload this report, and we remove Anthony Wu from that class, and then we go back to our open classes, once again we're going to be able to see that class listed, and you can see the class count 2 against 3. All right, and the final one that I picked for today's class is how to send an SMS based on the checkbox field. Okay, so if you check a box, we're going to be able to send an SMS once the prescription is ready for pickup. So here I have myself listed as one of the patients. I can add a prescription, and I can say prescription name, let's say Tylenol. And let's say the order is not ready for pickup yet. I'm going to leave this unchecked. I don't need to input any instructions just yet. Hit submit. Let's go back to the results page, and I can see the list of all the prescriptions, including the one that I just submitted. So now this trigger is running on insert and update. I could have sent that SMS upon the submission of the form if I had checked that box, but I can also do it based on update. So if I do inline insert or inline update, I can check the box now, hit update, and now you can see that the prescription is processed and the SMS is sent. Now, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate the SMS. You're going to have to take my word for it today because I can't expose any phone numbers here inside the class. But I will show you how we can switch that to an email as opposed to SMS, because I can show you how an email is received. All right, so we're going to learn how to set up all three triggers in today's live stream. So let's take a look at the very first one, which let me demo the first one just so that you can see. So let's say you have a list of contacts, okay? So we have Benjamin Jenkins. I can see the history of all the updates, okay? Now, if I make a change to that contact, let's say, once again, using inline edit, let's say we change the name from Benjamin to Alan Lee, and I hit update. If I go to view history, the expected behavior here is to actually see that latest change for that specific contact. And we are actually tracking all of the changes across all of the fields. Again, as I said, almost every single application can benefit from this trigger. Very useful to have for historical changes, to be able to track all the updates on a specific account. All right, so let's go into Caspio, and let's see how we can set up all of these triggers. The first one we're going to look at is the history log. And here I have two tables. I have a table of contacts, and I have the history log table. So when I make an update, so the expected behavior here is when I make an update to a contact, let's say I modify the contact's info, or I add a new contact to this table, I need to be able to add those modifications to my history log table. Okay? So the trigger needs to run on the insert a table. So when you make an insert or update to this table, send those updates to this table. So let's click on more and click on triggered actions. Okay, let's set up a brand new trigger. All right, and this is going to run on insert of data and update of data, meaning if you insert something and update something inside the contacts table, I also want to insert those changes inside the history log table. Okay? So once again, if you insert and update something in the contacts table, I want to send those changes inside the history log table. Now you need to select the data from the inserted table. The inserted table referring to the table where the data is being inserted into, which is our contacts table. You can do where for conditional if you'd like to only send those updates to the history log table if, let's say, the status equals to perhaps a lead. So only if the status equals to a lead on the contacts table will you send those updates to the history log table. But there's no need to do anything conditional today. Let's just remove the where clause. And let's just drag that over the trash can and let go. And the final step here, what you want to do is simply just map out the fields from both the contacts table and the history log table. So we're going to include all of our fields here on the left-hand side. You don't have to include all of them. It depends which ones you want to map out and which ones you want to copy over to the history log table. Let me see how many fields I have. All right, so we might have to do all of the fields, okay? So contact ID needs to be copied over to the history log table. This is going to be a one-to-many relationship because a single contact can have many changes. Okay, so we treat that as a one-to-many. So the fields that you see here on the left-hand side belong to our history log table. And then all you need to do is simply click on the data element and move over the field widget, snap that in place, and just map out the contact ID to the contact ID from the history log table. Okay, so what's going to happen now is when you insert a new contact to this table, you're copying that information over to the field inside the history log table. Okay, there's a little bit of a trick here that you can enable. Instead of clicking on data and moving this field element inside one at a time, you can actually right-click, duplicate, and snap that in place. It's a little bit faster. You still have to map out the fields last name to last name, title to title, until you have mapped out all of your fields inside the trigger. I'm not going to do all of them. Let's just get down to the email field. Now, many of you might be familiar with this trigger. I actually show people how to do this trigger in my training classes. But for those who haven't seen it, I think it's one of the most effective triggers that your applications can have. One more thing that you can add to this trigger is, let's say you have a user that's logging in to your application and you want to be able to track which user made the update, you're also going to have a user ID field inside this table as well, so that you can map out which user is making those updates, so you can send a user ID to the history log table, so all the time you know when the change was made, who made the change, and what all the changes are being made. Okay, so you can always validate to see if it's correct. I'm going to save my trigger. Let's give it a name. Copy data to history log table. Save and enable. All right, so let's test this out. Let's go back to data pages and let's take a look at a list of all of our contacts. I'm going to hit deploy, grab the URL, paste that in the browser, and now what we can do is, test it out. Let's add a new contact. Let's work with a new contact. Okay, so let me deploy that data page as well. Add new contact, grab the URL. So we're going to have these two tabs side by side. So let me add a contact here. Let's just say I'll start with myself. I'll be CEO of maybe Google, just a random phone number. And since we're tracking up to the email field, just say nedp@google.com. If I was a CEO at Google, I wouldn't be here today. So let's hit submit. So your submission was successful. Let's reload the contacts report. I should be able to see myself listed here. If I look at the history, the only thing I'll be able to see is that original entry that came in. So there's only one item here inside that list. But let's make an update. Let's demote Ned to maybe VP of sales at a different company, maybe Yahoo. Maybe you changed the phone number and you definitely changed the email. Since you no longer work at Google, we can hit update. So I made an update to Ned. If I go to view history, now you're going to be able to see two entries inside that data page. Not only do you see the original entry, because you always want to preserve that, but you're also going to be tracking all of the updates that happen on that account. Again, very simple trigger, very easy to implement, and it's highly effective if you're looking to create a history log table or a change log to be able to store those changes in a separate table. Okay, let's pause here for a moment. Let me see if you have any questions based on the first trigger before we move on to the next one. But hopefully you found that easy. Let me show you the trigger once again just so that you can see. We have two tables. The trigger is built on the table where the data is being updated or added into. All right, so there's my trigger. I'm running the action on insert of data and update of data. So I added myself to the contacts table. But when I did that, the trigger is copying all of that information to the history log table. When I updated my information inside the contacts table, we copy those updates over to the history log table. Okay. Everyone doing okay so far? Let me know in the chat window if you guys are following along okay, and then we can move on to the next trigger. Josh is good. All right, excellent. All right, so the second one is going to be slightly more complex. Okay, we're going to look at education example where we have the list of classes that have a class capacity, and we can also change the status if the class capacity equals to full, and we can also remove students from classes to be able to subtract. You can actually copy this tutorial for an inventory management application. I think down the line when we have another stream in the future, I'll show you how to do a full implementation of inventory management where we can also place item on back order, send emails. But again, today I wanted to show you a simple example so you can get acquainted with how the triggers work and you can expand upon them if needed. So let's go inside this application. Okay, I have two tables. We have the table of classes and we have a table of students. Okay, so this trigger is going to run on the table of students. So basically when I add somebody to this table, okay, I want to be able to add that increment to my classes table. Okay, so if you look at my classes table, we have the class capacity, which we can set when we create the class. We can set, okay, this class will have a class capacity of 30, maybe 20, maybe 50. But then when the student is added, to the other table, we're going to be adding a +1 to our classes table. So these two tables need to be joined together via the class ID field. Okay, this is how we're going to be able to grab information from one table and be able to manipulate data in another table. Okay, so you notice that I have a class ID, which is the primary key in my classes table. And in my students table, I also have the class ID, which is the foreign key. So now let's set up the trigger. So this trigger is actually going to happen on insert of data. Okay, so when I insert something into my students table, I need to be able to update the classes table. So we're going to go ahead and use the action called update. All right, let me snap that in place. And we need to update the classes table. All right, and what we need to set, okay, we need to set the class count. All right, so this is the field inside the classes table. Okay, but before we do that, we need to join these two tables inside the trigger. So we need to join the classes table to the students table. So we're going to click on the gear icon, click on join, and we're going to join this with the inserted table. Okay, and we're going to join these two tables with the primary key and the foreign key that I just talked about, which is the class ID. So we have the inserted class ID. So this is the table. This is the data where the this is the table where the data is being inserted into. Okay, which is the students table. We have the class ID, and we need to join that with the class ID from the classes table. All right. Okay, and we need to do a conditional set here. And we want to be able to add that +1 increment when the class capacity is greater than the class count. Okay, so that's going to be the conditional. Now, before we set up the conditional, let's make sure we're adding a +1 to our class count. So we need to use number. We're going to move this element. Okay, and we want the field class count to be +1. All right, so we're going to be adding a +1 to the class count from the classes table because we're updating this table here. Now let's do the conditional, which is basically where the class capacity is greater than class count. So let me explain. Field class count. And let's move this to trash. So only add +1 to the classes table, okay, if the class capacity is greater than the class count. Okay. So once I add a student to the students table, if the class capacity is still greater than the class count, go ahead and add +1 to the class count field inside the classes table. Okay. Now I need to run one more trigger here. Okay, one more action to update the status to full if the class capacity equals to class count. Okay, so this one is actually very simple. We're going to use, once again, update to update the classes table, and we need to set the class status equals to full if class capacity equals to class count. Okay, let me move that to the right in the trash. All right, so change the status inside the classes tables to full if class capacity equals to class count. All right, so let's try this trigger now. Let's hit save. Add student to classes table. Save and enable. Let's look at our data pages. And again, you can always watch this at a later time if you need to see a refresher and watch at your own pace. This stream is going to be made available on our YouTube channel, so don't worry if you're missing things. You can always watch the video at a later time. So let's take a look at all of our open classes. We're going to hit deploy, grab our URL, copy it, and let's just close down a few of these tabs. All right, so these are my open classes. Now, if the trigger is working correctly, what's going to happen now is when I enroll a new student, so we're adding data to our students table now. And remember, when you add something to a students table, we're going to be adding +1 to the classes table because we're updating the classes table. So let's just say Mike Tyson. We're going to hit submit. Takes me back, and now you can see class count to 2. Okay, there is one more action that's firing here. Basically, once class count equals to class capacity, we're changing the class status to full. So let's try it out. Sarah Lee. Hit submit. We no longer see that class. The reason why you don't see this class listed anymore, if I edit my data page, you're going to be able to see how I'm filtering my classes based on the status field, and I only want to display the ones that equal to open. But because inside my table now of classes, you're going to be able to see calculus is no longer open. It's full. That's why that data page is not displaying that class anymore. Okay? Yeah, you bet. No worries. Thank you for that feedback. Okay. So now let's set up the second trigger, which is very similar to the first one. Now we want to be able to create the action here when you delete a student. We want to subtract one from the classes table. And we also want to change the status to open because the class capacity no longer equals to the class count. Okay. So let's go back to triggered actions on the other table of students. All right, so again, instead of building it from scratch, you can always make a copy of it. Just clone the trigger, so make a copy of it, and this time, remove student from classes table. You can call these triggers whatever you want. Let's save it. Let's edit. And now it's not happening on insert of data, okay? Now we are actually deleting data from the students table. So run the action on delete of data instead of insert, okay? We're no longer adding +1. Now we want to subtract 1. So just change the operator to minus. Okay? And it's no longer a join on the inserted. It's actually join on the deleted. That's also very important. Okay? This is going to remain greater than or equal to now. Okay? So basically, if the class capacity equals to the class count, let's say 3 of 3, the trigger is going to see that. Definitely subtract 1 if it equals to 3 of 3, okay? And then we want to change the status to open once again if this is greater than the class count. So if class capacity is greater than the class count, obviously that makes sense, right? If the class capacity is 3 and the class count is 2, change the status back to open. And we're going to do that exactly right now. So let's save it. Let's enable it. Let me go back to my data pages. Let's deploy manage students. Grab our URL, copy it, and paste that here. All right, so we have Mike Tyson in these two classes, calculus. My class is no longer visible, but if we remove Mike Tyson, okay, I think this will bring back the other class now, the calculus class. You can now see how we removed one. Now we have 2 out of 3. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions. One important thing that I want to point out regarding the actual triggers is they only work when you're inserting something into a data page or updating something into a data page. Let's say you were to now import data into your table. The trigger is not going to fire. So it's not going to work when you import data. Okay? It only works when you make a change on the data page level. But hopefully you can see how with triggers we can automate a lot of business procedures in the back end to avoid human workflows and human intervention. We can automate a lot of these procedures in the back end by learning how to drag and drop those elements inside the trigger. Okay. Now we have one more left, which is going to be a little bit more complex than what we just looked at, but I promise I'll try to make it as easy to understand as I can. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions on the one that we just looked at. But just try to imagine if you have, let's say, inventory, and you set the inventory to maybe quantity 100, and you have an e-commerce solution. Somebody just placed an order to buy out all 100. You don't want that to be displayed anymore because you have no more of that item left to sell. So you want to remove that item from the list so nobody else can purchase that item. But let's say an admin in the back end decides to, you know what, we cancel that order. Let's put that back in inventory. Once again, that item will be available for selling. Okay, but you can also take it a step further. You know, you can send an SMS alert. You can also send an email. So if you don't want that to be your workflow for your use case, you could have a checkbox to be checked to put that item on back order if the number of items ordered exceeds what you have left in inventory, right? So if you're showing 20 and somebody wants 30, they place the order, let's put that item on back order and notify the admin at the same time. So with that, we can have multiple tables talking to each other, especially if you have invoices that you're processing. It's a very typical inventory management system. All right. Do me a favor, let me know how you feel about what you're seeing so far. Maybe give me a quick rating from 1 to 10. 1, it's just too difficult, I don't get it. 5, you're somewhere in the middle. Anything above a 5 is a good score. 10 is also obviously the best score you can give me. So just let me know how you feel about the content. I just want to make sure I'm explaining myself. I'm taking my time with it, trying to be as detailed as I can to make sure people understand how to go about doing that. Okay, I'll take a 12. Anything above a 10 is also welcome. Thank you for that. All right, I do have a comment here. You can schedule a task to force an update on a table that is updated via scheduled import. This will make the triggers fire. Okay, thank you, Brian. We'll probably have another session on tasks. Okay, but that's a good comment by Brian there. What does a Caspio employee say when they trick or treat? Trick or treat. Are we able to see the generated SQL? Unfortunately, no, that's actually hidden. So you're not going to be able to see that. That's not part of the standard offering on the Caspio platform. Cascading errors are my favorite. Mine too, actually. I've had a few instances where cascading failed on me. All of these actions are applicable to my apps. Perfect. Good to hear. Hopefully, I'm happy that I picked something relevant for today's class. All right, guys, we have one more trigger left, okay? And for this last example, we're going to be looking at how to send an SMS. And it's set up almost similar to what we just looked at. We have the patients table and we have the prescriptions order status, okay? So the idea here is when you insert something into the prescription order table, let's say the prescription is ready for pickup, you want to insert that information, you can fire that trigger to send an SMS if you check a checkbox, okay, initially. But if you don't check that box, you can also update the table at a later time to send that SMS. Okay, so it happens on insert and also the update, right? Because the physician wants to be able to submit that order, right, without it being ready for pickup. But once it's ready for pickup, you want to update it so that the patient can come in and pick up that prescription. Okay, now we're going to be checking against a few criteria before we send that trigger. So let's take a look and see what we can do here. So we have the patients table. Once again, you'll notice that we're going to need to join the two tables. This one has the primary key, random ID. And in my prescriptions table, we also have the patient ID, which is text 255. Now in this table, we have the prescription name, the status of the prescription. SMS is automatically going to be checked once the prescription is processed, okay? The date sent is also automatically going to be populated once the SMS is sent. And we can also send instructions to the patient, take this medicine 3 times daily, something like that. All right, so the trigger needs to happen on this table here. So let's build the trigger. And it's going to happen on insert and update. All right, and what we want to do here is we want to send the SMS. Okay, so you're going to look at the action here, send SMS. We're going to snap that in place, and you want to be able to select the data from the inserted table. And once again, we need to be able to join the patient's table to the prescription table so that we can pull the phone number from the patient's table. That's how the trigger is going to gain access to the fields from the patient's table. So we're going to join. And just like in the previous example, we're going to be able to join our patient's table. And we need to basically join our inserted patient ID to the patient ID from the patient's table. All right. So the data is being inserted into this table, prescription. We have a foreign key, patient ID, inside that table. Okay, and we need to be able to join that with the patient ID from the patient's table. Now, we need to be able to check the logical operator here, AND. So we need to be able to check against the prescription status, SMS notification, and the date sent. So we need the logic, and we need to include AND. Okay, so where prescription status equals to true, so let me go ahead and include that. Let me remove this little guy out. Okay. We need one more field, so let's go ahead and duplicate that. And where the SMS notification, I'll explain in just a second, is not equal to true, sorry. And then one more, which is the date sent, is blank. All right, so when you create the prescription, all right, if you don't check the checkbox for prescription status, it's not going to send out SMS, okay? But if you do check the box, then send the SMS, okay? And also send the SMS if the notification is not checked and if the date is blank, date sent, okay? I'm not actually showing those fields on my submission form. So if you look at the example once again, you will see. When I add a prescription, the only one that I have here is the checkbox to send the SMS. The other two are not visible on my submission form because the only way this SMS is going to be sent if this is true and the other one is not equal to true and the date sent is blank. Okay, so we have a few criteria that we're checking against here in order to send that SMS. Okay, and now for the to field, we can move over the field widget and I can look into my patients table to grab the phone number. Okay, and here you can now customize the message when that SMS is sent. You can say your prescription is ready for pickup. Okay, another reason why we do this is when you're updating the prescription, let's say you change something to a different field, you don't want that SMS to be sent out every single time you make an update to a prescription name or to the instructions. You only want to send that SMS when the checkbox equals to true. Okay, and we'll see that in just a second. Now the final thing that we want to do here is to update both the SMS notification and date sent when the SMS is sent out. Okay, so we need to include update. Let me include that here. Update the inserted table, which is the one that we're adding the data into. Okay, and I need to set the SMS notification to true and my date sent. So let's just, well, I can include another field this way. So let's just move this here underneath. Oops, sorry. No, I'll just copy it. And by copy, I mean add. So let me add my date sent. And what we need to do is grab today's time, okay, the time zone. When that SMS was sent, I need to include a timestamp here. So we're going to use date and include the timestamp like that. And finally here is where the prescription status equals to true. So prescription status equals to, well, let's find it. True, true, true. There we go. So I'll explain here in just a second. I need to update the inserted table, which is the table where we are submitting those prescriptions. Okay, so when the data is inserted into that table, I need to update that table and say the SMS notification is true, because once you send the SMS, I need to check that other checkbox as well to let me know that, hey, that SMS was already processed. Okay, and I need to stamp the date sent so that I know when that SMS was sent out. So we're basically just updating the table of prescriptions once this SMS is sent out. Okay, so let me save it and also update them when prescription status equals to true, which means once you check that box to process the SMS, update the inserted table prescription status. Sorry, check against this. Where this is true, only then update these two fields in the inserted table. Okay, let me save it Let me give it a name. Send SMS. Save and enable. Now, I cannot show you this because I can't really expose anybody's mobile number here in my table. So if we look at the other table here of patients, let me just make sure that I have removed. Yeah, I did. Okay. So here's my patient. I have myself listed. It's just a fictitious phone number, right? What's going to happen now is let me copy the patient ID and let's go back into the other table of prescriptions. Once you submit that prescription, okay, and you update this, so you submit this, prescription is ready for pickup, you save the change, you can see how SMS notification checkbox is checked, meaning that the SMS was sent out, and we know what date and time that SMS was sent out. Okay, so then on the front end, let's take a look. Let me take a look at a list of all of my patients, which is just myself. Let me copy the URL. Okay, let's say you add a new prescription, Advil. Okay, but I'm not sending the SMS just yet. I want to add this to my system. Take once a day with food or water. Hit submit. Okay, so let me go back to the list of patients. Sorry, not this one, the one that we just copied from my account. View patients. Grab the URL, copy it once again, paste that here. All right, so then I've added my prescription for Ned. I can see all of the prescriptions for Ned, including the one that I just added for Advil, right? But the SMS is not sent out yet. You can see the prescription status is still pending, SMS notification is still pending, and we don't know when that was sent. Okay, so now I can click edit because it can also fire on update, not just on insert. So if I check that box now and hit update, you will see now processed, sent, and the SMS. You'll just have to take my word for it. If you have the actual phone number in that table, I will now receive that SMS and letting me know that my prescription is ready for pickup. But just so that I can demonstrate how that's received, let's switch the SMS to an email. Okay, so you guys can see. Okay, let me edit. So let's include the email. So send email instead of SMS. All right. Again, we're going to use select. Okay. And let's remove the select for now because I want this to become available for me so I can snap my widget in place. And all I need to do is copy this entire setup here that I had before. So I can just make a copy of it, snap that up here for the email, which is the same exact thing, right? Send an email. From the inserted table, we're joining the two tables together, and if all of these conditions equals to true or not true or is blank, we're going to send that email. So from no reply at company.com to, we can grab the email from the patients table. I'm using my email address, so let's move the email here. And the subject, your order is ready for pickup, and then the message, here are the details of your order, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And let's save. We can also disable the SMS if you don't want that. You can disable it, and it's no longer going to fire. The only one that's going to fire is send an email. But you can also have send SMS and email if you'd like to notify the patient both methods. So let's save it. And let's go back to our data page. Let's take a look at the list of all of our patients. I don't have a bookmark, so I have to keep going back and forth like this. Okay, so there's my email. I add a prescription, antibiotics. I'm not going to send an email just yet. We're going to hit submit. Let us go back to the results page and view the prescriptions. So here it is for antibiotics. If I now update that, hopefully, I'm going to check my email here on my right monitor to see if I get it. I should, if all went well. Let me just take a look at my email. I'll hit refresh here once or twice to see how many times it takes. Give me just 1 second. I'm still waiting for it. Here it is. It came in. So let me just double click on it and move this to the left. Now you can further customize the content of the email. Okay, so this is what came into my email address. But expect the same behavior for the SMS. You're just going to have to check your phone, and you're going to be able to see that text message comes in as long as you have the right phone number inside the patient's table. So here, obviously I'm not going to use my phone number, but if I had my phone number here, the SMS would go out. Okay. So let me take a look at your comments and feedback that's coming inside the chat for a moment, but let me just think if I missed anything. I don't think that I did. These are the 3 triggers that I wanted to show you. The only difference here with this one is that we actually have some criteria that we're checking against. So if the prescription status equals to true, meaning if you check the box, send the SMS, but the only way it's going to send that SMS if the SMS notification is not checked and if the date sent is blank. Okay, the other 2 fields. That's the only way this SMS will go out, if these 3 conditions are met, because we used the and. If you used or, then any one of those conditions, as long as it's true, the SMS will send. But we're using and on purpose here because we need to check against all 3 of these. Okay, so every time I send an SMS, this is not going to be checked. The date sent is going to be blank, but once the SMS is sent, then we can update the inserted table. So once the prescription status equals to true, only then we update the SMS notification to be checked, and the date sent, we're using today's time to update the prescriptions table. Okay. All right. So those are the 3 triggers that we covered in today's live stream. I hope that you guys enjoyed the 3 triggers. If you guys would like some other implementations in the future, definitely send me an email. Most of you have my email on file. You may have seen it right here in the live stream. Let me know if you have any suggestions on other type of triggers that you would like to see. If it's a complicated trigger, we might have to dedicate 1 hour to it, just because there's a lot of explaining to do. And I mean, even in the past, I have built triggers that combine multiple elements where they fire top to bottom. So once the first trigger executes, the second one will happen, then the third and the fourth. But they can get very, very complex, especially if you're checking against multiple criteria on how you want to update other tables. Okay, and it can get very confusing, but also at the same time fun and powerful if you are joining tables together to be able to pull data from other fields to be used inside the trigger and to manipulate some other fields and other tables. Okay. Hopefully today's live stream answered a lot of your questions when it comes to triggers. This video is going to be available later on our YouTube channel, so definitely tune in if you'd like. But for now, let's see if we can answer some of your questions here that we have. Okay. Are we able to? Okay, we answered that one. We answered that one. Same concept for anything, more or less. Same concept for anything, yeah, more or less. But you know, we haven't really talked about loops yet. We haven't talked about variables that can be reused inside a trigger. We are definitely going to have another session on triggers in the future. Okay, where we want to cover most of these elements that you see here on the left-hand side and how they're used and how they can be used inside a trigger. Okay, I think there was a question on loops. Let me see. Phil had a question here. Can we insert details from our table and add it to the email? Can we insert details? Yes, you can actually. So you can actually pull fields from your tables. If you join the tables, you can pull those fields and you can use them as parameters inside the message in the email or SMS. Very helpful, because even here I could actually, when I send the SMS to my patient, I could say your prescription and then I can include a prescription name, right? Your prescription Tylenol is ready for pickup. Here are your instructions, colon, and then we can include the instructions from the physician. So now they know that, hey, you should take that medicine with food or water 3 times a day, so on and so on, so on and so forth. Okay. Let me take a look at my other questions that are coming in here. What are loops? So loops, while due for each record in patient due. So it kind of loops around. The trigger will loop. So I'm trying to think of a good use case to tell you on how you can use the loops. I mean, if we just look at the while and then do, if you're thinking about a table, while something is happening, do this to another table, kind of in real time. So we can do another session on loops. I'm having a hard time thinking of a good example right now for loops. So it's kind of like almost like a conditional, like for each record in the patient's table, do something else. I'll think of a good example for the next stream, okay? Who did that question come in? Northwest Custom Apparel. That's a good question. But, I mean, I'm having a hard time thinking of a good use case. Let's take a look. Test, email, question mark. Oh, here's my email, in case some of you are asking. Caspio.com, okay. Hi Ned, from a previous video you made, I created 2 triggers you are describing in this session to enroll students to a class and calculating against the capacity as well as changing the status. Okay, sounds good, Stephen. It works beautifully, so thank you. You're welcome. This uses an insert and delete triggers. However, I need a third insert and update trigger to populate and update a log in a separate table. When I enable the third trigger, it disables the previous 2. Right, so when it comes to triggers, you can only run one trigger at a time on a table. So I'd have to look at your use case to see how we can fix that. Or if you can do me a favor, just check with the support team. There is a way to do that. But I need to look at your setup to see what you've done in order to give you a good answer on that. So if you're not able to get that answer from the support team, which you should, then definitely send me an email, okay? And I'll take a look at it for you. So the question here basically is, let me save. Right, so this one is enabled here. It's active. And if my memory serves me well, let's say I duplicate the trigger here, enable it, it'll disable the other one. So you can only run trigger at a time on the same table. But I've done this in it's been a while since I've done this, but I'll have to see how there's a workaround for that. We can definitely we can circumvent that, but I need to think about it a little bit more, okay? How can I run all 3 triggers? You might have to combine them all inside a single trigger, okay? Can you show us how we can use variables? Yeah, I mean, let me think of a good example of how we can use variables in a future stream, okay? So I'll come up with something, a good use case. I don't want to have to poke around the trigger now to see if I can set it up, because we're going to go off tangent and we're going to just, make a mess of things. And I don't want to do that unless I have a good use case to show you, okay? But Benj, I will definitely let you know via email once we have a good example to show in the future stream. I'm anticipating maybe having another live session on triggers in a few weeks. And if you guys would like to include something that you would like to see, then definitely send me an email and we'll do a follow-up session on this topic. All right. Guys, thank you so much. I know I recognize a lot of the names that are coming into these live streams via chat, so I really, really appreciate you guys coming back. It means a lot. That tells me that you guys are enjoying the content, so thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Nice to see you guys come into these live streams and communicate with me, so thank you so much. Feedback is always appreciated, so thank you for that as well. You don't have to. We're all here to learn together, so if I'm not able to come up with an answer in my live stream, hopefully somebody else in the class can point somebody else to the tutorial or topic, or let them know how it can be done. I really want us all to collaborate and have a good session to learn And for me, in many cases, this is a refresher for me because I don't spend nearly as much time inside the platform as I used to. So when I come up with this content, it's very helpful for me because I'm able to recall a lot of the things that I used to know how to do in the platform. So, but yeah, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Have a good day, safe Monday, and yeah, we'll see you next week. I think for next week, what we're doing is, well, let me take a look actually, just so I can have the exact title so you guys can see. I believe it's how to customize and make registration forms more effective. This topic actually came from somebody, so let me take a look. Give you guys the exact title right now. All right, so the exact title is for next week, how to create effective registration forms. Okay, so it kind of piggybacks on the session that we had before with web forms. But there's so many different registration forms that you can create with checkboxes at the bottom to accept terms of service and privacy policy. What makes an effective registration form? These days, you want to keep the registration form as minimal as possible to your fields to avoid some barriers because people will get overwhelmed and they're just used to maybe just submitting the name and email to be able to sign up for the account. The quicker you can get them through the gate, the faster they're going to sign up for the account and become a customer, okay? As opposed to back in the day when you were collecting name, phone, email, company size, all of that other information that could be collected at a later time. Okay? Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate the comment. Need more complex applications. Okay, Ehab, that's a good comment. That's a fair comment. Just keep in mind, here's my email, okay? If you'd like to see a specific workflow inside a complex example, we can definitely build complex applications in Caspio, okay? However, we only get 1 hour for these live streams. There's no possible way for me to build the entire application from scratch, but we can try to tackle a specific workflow of that application, something that's complex inside that application. I can build it ahead of time, just to demonstrate the functionality of that application. Okay, it's not going to look aesthetically pleasing because that will require more time. But if it's functionality, we can build something like a prototype very quickly and be able to demo that. But yes, you can build much more complex examples. But I try to focus in these live streams. I try to focus on specific workflows of the application. Different phases of the application. But yeah, definitely let me know if you'd like to see something a little bit more complex and what you mean by a complex application. Would love to work with you offline and come up with a good topic for the live stream. All right. Thank you guys so much. Again, the live stream is going to be made available on our YouTube channel. The comment section will remain open. I'll be here answering your questions for a few more minutes. And then, yeah, hope to see you guys next week. Have a good week. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.